tonight.
When they say, are you a baby killer? you kind of know that they're probably not pro-choice.
This is more than a kooky group. This is a crazy group, a criminally insane group.
In the words of Gandalf, we have just entered the realm of Gondor.
Michigan State University has reached a $500 million settlement with the 332 victims of Larry Nassar, including $75 million to be set aside in case more victims come forward. The school's interim president has previously floated the idea that settlement funds could come from raising tuition.
If our leaders seek to conceal the truth or we as people become accepting.
Rex Tillerson spoke at Virginia Military Institute's graduation and took some shots at his old boss.
We as American citizens are on a pathway to relinquishing our freedom.
Thousands of teachers have taken a personal day to march in North Carolina, where it's illegal for public employees to go on strike. They're demanding that salaries and spending per student be brought up to the national average, and they want better health care, not just for themselves, but also for their students, by demanding the state expand Medicaid. The Senate continued to learn more about how Cambridge Analytica functioned.
Was voter suppression a service that U.S. clients could request in their contracts with Cambridge Analytica while Bannon was vice president?
Yes.
China is urging North Korea to go ahead with the June summit with President Trump, which North Korea was threatening to cancel. Kim Jong-un's government is still being defensive about denuclearization. And when it comes to U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton, they said, "We do not hide our feeling of repugnance towards him."
The special counsel investigation is one day shy of its first birthday, and today we all got some party favors, in the form of small but fun little nuggets of information to keep the Mueller watchers on their sugar high. First, the Senate Judiciary Committee released hundreds of pages of transcripts and documents related to that Trump Tower meeting between a sort of Kremlin-linked lawyer, a music publicist named Rob Goldstone, some other Russians, Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, and Jared Kushner. No explosive headlines there, but also very little in the way of exoneration. Don Jr. definitely wanted to hear dirt on Hillary Clinton, if there was any, but he claims there wasn't. The second news item today was that the Senate Intelligence Committee released a statement saying that they agree with the intelligence community's findings on Russian meddling, which Democrat Mark Warner pointed out includes the assertion that Russia tried to swing the election to Trump. A committee Republican warned that that conclusion wasn't final yet. Finally, the Office of Government Ethics released President Trump's financial disclosure form for 2017, and it said that Trump reimbursed Michael Cohen for an unnamed expense of more than $100,000. This essentially confirms Rudy Giuliani's disclosure that Trump paid Cohen back for the Stormy Daniels hush money.
Funneled through a law firm, and the president repaid it.
The form also made it pretty clear that Giuliani lied to the press when he tried to clean up the mess he made by saying the reimbursement was done through a monthly retainer. Not the case as far as we can tell. The common thread with these disclosures is that while they don't reveal much new, they knock down a lot of implausible spin from the Trump team. The Russians definitely meddled in the election. No, Trump probably wasn't in the dark about the Daniels payment. No, Don Jr. didn't take that meeting to hear about adoption policy. And no, the Mueller investigation, now cruising into its second year, isn't just a baseless witch hunt.
In Washington this week, Democrats hoping to run for president in 2020 paraded through a conference held by the liberal Center for American Progress. The speeches they gave offered a glimpse at the party's message 2 years from now. And mostly, it was liberal red meat for a mostly liberal crowd.
I promise you, if we had 51% of women in Congress, do you think we'd be debating whether we should have access to contraceptives?
We're sort of horrified at some of the things that this president has said and has done.
And so I end with this poem. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet must be, the land where everyone is free, the poor man, the Indian, the Negro, me.
But that's Washington. In the Midwest, where Democrats badly need to make up ground, the conversation often sounds a lot different.
How you doing? Great to see you. Great to see you. How are you? Katie, how are you? Good to see you. Thanks for coming, you guys.
Illinois Representative Cheri Bustos was one of just a dozen Democrats who was reelected in a district Trump won in 2016.
Well, welcome, everybody. I think I've said hello to everybody in the room now.
She was chosen by her colleagues in Congress as chair of Heartland Engagement, which means it's her job to train and recruit Democrats to run in deep red districts like hers.
We've lost 13 seats in the last 10 years.
It's been red for 25 plus years.
I would be the third Democrat on the board out of 10.
And her advice is in high demand from people looking to run for office.
Okay, we got a lot of work to do.
This is Bustos' 8th Build the Bench seminar. Day-long events held in the Midwest where candidates for everything from school board to county commissioner learn the basics of campaigning. But for Democrats running in red-leaning rural areas, there's one question that comes up again and again.
What are things that you found that resonated with a Trump Bustos voter?
You cannot win by just getting Democrats. Right. You've got to be able to appeal to independents and some reasonable Republicans. You do that by relating, listening, understanding that it's a moderate district, and making sure that your politics fit the district that you're trying to represent.
In districts like hers, that means steering the conversation away from controversial issues and towards issues every voter has in common, like jobs and the economy.
Every Democrat in the Illinois U.S. House of Representatives comes from Chicagoland, except for me, all right? Donald Trump won this district where you're sitting right now. What you can talk about when you walk into a room in Chicago, right off the bat, is very different from what you talk about as your very first issue when you walk into a room here. But where you can't go wrong is talking about people struggling. You can go wrong by talking about the first thing when you walk into a room, talking about an issue that is a divisive issue. I think we as a party need to ask people to have faith in us again.
Why did Democrats lose that faith in the first place?
I think there's a view that we focused on things that aren't important to their everyday lives.
Like what?
There's been too much siloing going on among the constituencies. You know, what is good for white working class people is probably also good for African American families or Latino families. But we don't have to talk about it in those terms. That
you mean like identity politics?
Yeah, and I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between what people want for their kids.
It's easy for her to say that, though, because she represents a district that's pretty uniformly white, rural, and old. But Democrats can't totally avoid the controversial topics that have come to define their party nationwide.
When doing meet and greets and small-time chats, people are very interested in guns, right? And that one comes up all the time.
If somebody says, what are your thoughts on guns? You can't just say, well, I'm not focused on that, I'm focused on the economy. You got to answer the question. If somebody says, you're a Democrat, you're going to take away my guns, there's this assumption. And I say, of course I'm a defender of the Second Amendment because it's part of our Constitution. But I also don't think that if you are on the terrorist watch list, that you ought to be able to buy a gun. And most people agree with that. And we as Democrats also shouldn't look down on people who want to own a weapon. There are issues that divide and there are issues that unite. And I'm Catholic, and I am 100% pro-choice, but I don't go in a room talking about that. If I get asked about it, and you can kind of tell by how people ask you about it what their thoughts are, when they say, are you a baby killer? You kind of know that they're probably not pro-choice. But if I know that somebody is anti-choice, I'll just say, I understand that. I value life as well. I have 3 sons and 2 grandkids. I don't get into trying to change people's minds. I don't get into having an argument about that.
So find common ground with conservative voters. Don't try to change their minds. The problem is, Democrats aren't very good at that. Even Bustos admits it.
I think over time, we thought that we could buy television ads or buy radio to replace that hard work, and that doesn't work because voters, they don't want to be taken for granted. And I think there was a feeling that not only were they taken for granted, but in some cases they were talked down to. I mean, we've always been the party of working people. And then all of a sudden, when you ask people, and this word elite is used about our party, that means we got a lot of work to do.
This morning, EPA Chief Scott Pruitt surfaced on Capitol Hill for a budget hearing, fielding typical softball questions from Republican senators.
Some of the good work that you are doing to take the regulatory boot off of the American workers is certainly appreciated.
But the hearing happened to follow yesterday's news that the EPA Inspector General will open another investigation into Pruitt's conduct. This latest probe brings the number of investigations Pruitt is facing to an even dozen, focused on 8 main areas, including his travel spending. Less than a year into his appointment, Pruitt's office spent more than $330,000 in travel expenses, documents show. He also demanded round-the-clock security detail on his first day on the job, which has already cost taxpayers at least $3 million. Oh, and there's also that $43,000 phone booth. This kind of spending isn't uncommon for the people Trump has picked to serve at the highest levels of government. 7 of Trump's cabinet members have been tied to scandals involving them allegedly wasting taxpayer money. Now reports say that White House aides are pushing the president to fire Pruitt, which would make him the 3rd cabinet official to be sacked. First to go, Tom Price, Trump's first Secretary of Health and Human Services. He was forced out after spending about $1 million flying on private jets.
I will tell you personally, I'm not happy about it. I am not happy about it.
What are you going to do about it, Mr. President?
I'm going to look at it. I am not happy about it, and I let him know it.
Next up, David Shulkin, former Secretary of Veterans Affairs, first appointed by Obama and canned after a damning report revealed a $122,000 jaunt through Northern Europe. Official appointments account for at least 4 of the days, but not his trip to Wimbledon.
I do recognize the optics of this are not good. I accept responsibility for that.
It's not the optics that are not good, it's the facts that are not good. I yield back.
Pruitt joins other cabinet members who've managed to spend wildly and still not find themselves out of a job. There was Ryan Zinke, who took 3 helicopter rides costing $53,000, one of which was to squeeze in a quick horseback ride with VP Mike Pence. And he spent $138,670 on 3 new sets of double doors for his office. There was also Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson, who came under fire in February for asking his wife, Candy Carson, to pick out furniture for his office. The custom hardwood table, chairs, and hutch that Mrs. Carson picked were worth a whopping $31,000. The department initially denied Carson was aware of the purchase.
The story of alleged cult NXIVM has all the makings of a binge-worthy docuseries. A secretive leader who allegedly had women branded with his initials, wealthy heiresses who helped finance the organization, and a Hollywood actress accused of luring in fresh recruits. Leader Keith Raniere and actress Allison Mack have been arrested and now face charges of sex trafficking and forced labor. NXIVM denies it's a cult and says it's working with the authorities to demonstrate Raniere's innocence. Raniere and Mack have pleaded not guilty and are awaiting trial. Their lawyers wouldn't comment for this piece. But one person is talking, the obsessed former NXIVM employee who broke the story in the first place.
I'm trying to write a song that's appropriate for Raniere, and this came to my mind. Because it is an American story.
This is Frank Parlato, the guy who originally revealed the alleged sex slave cult around Keith Raniere. Though he lives in upstate New York, he spends time on his properties in Key West.
So how much do you come out here on a boat?
The answer is every day I can.
So what else do you do for fun?
Write about Raniere.
In 2007, Parlato was recommended to work for Raniere by his consultant friends who both briefly did work for the group. Infamous political operatives Roger Stone and Steve Pigeon. Parlato is a real estate developer on paper, but had built a reputation for relentlessness in local political fights. He believed the Raniere-run NXIVM was a legit company under attack from bad people, and it sent him a list of those people to seek and destroy.
Here was what they wanted me to do.
What does this mean? Smash mouth $225,000?
That was what they were willing to pay me for smashing various people.
Why do they call it smash mouth?
Because they wanted these people destroyed.
And it says here, disbarment $25K. Does that mean they'd pay you $25,000?
If I did that.
If you got them disbarred?
Correct.
Whoa. Just a hearing will get you $15K.
So this is what they were up to.
Discredit, indict, $50,000.
Right.
Wow, this is quite a list.
But taking out enemies wasn't the only thing NXIVM wanted Parlato to do. When he was asked to help NXIVM get a loan, he learned members and Seagram's heirs, Claire and Sarah Bronfman, had lost a shocking amount of money in the commodities market. He says Claire told him Raniere had been making the trades.
So, well, why did you invest $65 million and lose it all? Don't you think that's a little bit unusual? And she said, unfortunately, my father, Edgar Bronfman Sr., he wanted to thwart Keith's successful investment, so he manipulated the entire commodities market in tandem with the quote-unquote Illuminati.
What did you think when she told you that?
I suspected she was being defrauded.
The notice he was fired didn't give a reason, but Parlato thinks it was because he questioned Raniere by asking for receipts of the trades. According to court documents, the Bronfmans did lose $65 million in commodities trades, and Parlato recovered millions in real estate investments for the sisters. But in an act Parlato saw as a betrayal, they later said he took $1 million, which he claims was payment. We were unable to reach the Bronfmans after multiple attempts for comment. Then the FBI indicted Parlato, with the disputed $1 million a factor in just one in a string of charges dating back over a decade. Parlato refused a plea deal and says he's innocent, and so began his war with NXIVM.
And that was when I had an awakening, Ellie. I had no idea the depths of their dishonesty. And then I said, if they had done this to me, then all of these other enemies that supposedly had cheated them, they were also probably similarly innocent. And I turned on an instant and said, this is more than a kooky group. This is a crazy group, a criminally insane group. And it's not just Raniere.
So couldn't NXIVM say you're just a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind?
Not only could they say it, but they did say that.
And are they right?
Well, disgruntled, no. Ex-employee, yes. Axe, yes, a punishing axe. I sharpened my axe.
Okay.
Parlato turned on NXIVM with the fury it had hired him to use against its enemies. He carpet-bombed Raniere and NXIVM with attacks on his website. He also deployed the two other publications he co-owns, Art Voice and the Niagara Falls Reporter, a tabloid he'd used in the past to wage war against the popular Niagara Falls boat tour.
Part of my strategy was to mock Raniere. I photoshopped images of him. I wrote fictional stories about him just to make him look ridiculous, because sometimes that's necessary too.
And he wrote a lot.
So how many hours total do you think you spent on this?
How many hours are there in a year?
Do you think you've spent a cumulative year on this?
Maybe.
Some of Parlato's practices are questionable. He tries to confirm his scoops with multiple sources, but he also posts the names and photos of the women who are allegedly NXIVM slaves.
Tell me a little bit more about the decision to name them. I mean, that's pretty controversial. Like, even in newspapers now, they don't name rape victims.
Because they weren't exclusively victims. Because they were recruiting others to be victims. So there was an incredible pressure on these women to recruit other women into this sex slaver cult.
More than 2 years into his anti-NXIVM campaign, Parlato revealed women were being branded in a secret ceremony. The New York Times confirmed the story in October, which led to a federal investigation.
When the New York Times came out, that was the game changer, because then I had validation for all the things that I'd written.
Until the Times story came out, what did your friends and colleagues say about your obsession?
That I was insane.
What would you tell them?
I gotta write one more story. There's something here, and it has to be stopped.
NXIVM will never be the same, but Parlato isn't over it.
He went after me, and I flipped him on his back and landed him in prison. And that's where he is today as we're speaking here, as inmate number 57005-177. He went to win, and I went to win, and he lost.
New Zealand markets itself as a subtropical paradise of pristine landscapes, dotted with the occasional sheep. Close to 4 million foreign tourists visit the islands every year, and over 500,000 of them have a very specific mission.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Nice.
To experience the Lord of the Rings in real life.
He's trying to kill you and you're smiling. That's crazy.
For 15 years, Dawn Gora has been taking people on tours of a place that doesn't exist. The mythical plains of Gondor.
In the words of Gandalf, we have just entered the realm of Gondor.
Just passed into the realm of Gondor.
If you watch The Fellowship of the Ring, for me it's like a picture postcard of New Zealand. And then do you remember how they ride the stream? So this would be the Entwash River. So Rohan would be here and Gondor would be here.
Do you think that this landscape is important in the movie?
Yes, very iconic, especially the brown top tussock. I like to call it Gondorian gold. It's very iconic in the movie.
Tourism is New Zealand's biggest export.
Let us take you.
And in ads, the country brands itself as 100% pure. But Middle-earth has some dirty problems. The country's second largest export industry is transforming the naturally arid Mackenzie region, that Gondorian gold, into green pasture.
We've got quite a few dairy farms in the region, and so where 15 years ago the landscape was very like this, they now have big irrigators and it is green and lush with grass. If you took an overall view, you actually see circles right throughout the Mackenzie.
This is big money. New Zealand provides more dairy for the global market than any other country, and alone provides half of China's dairy imports. But the massive dairy industry has an environmental impact to match. The country's 6.6 million cows are contaminating the iconic landscapes that the tourism industry depends on. Simon Williamson, the provincial president of the Federated Farmers Organization, doesn't see it that way.
It's a paddock of chicory out here that we're just cutting for seed.
He manages a 9,000-acre farm in the Mackenzie Basin.
The biodiversity in the soil is immense to what it was when we started. It's now got beautiful soil structure, and farmers, that's what they do. They look after the land, don't they? And it's in their own interest. There's a few so-called intellects that like to knock on about it, but I don't think the rest of the country really buy into it.
Dave Kelly and Ann Brower are two of those so-called intellects. They say turning the land from gold to green isn't just ruining the region's aesthetic. It's messing up the landscape on a fundamental level, turning Gondor into Mordor.
You go to the Mackenzie, the biological values are not obvious, and I don't think the farmers understand them. And so you go into that system and you put irrigation and fertilizer on it. You are obliterating it.
How important is the Mackenzie area from an ecological standpoint?
Well, it's very important. It has unusual landforms, and as a result of that, it has a whole bunch of unusual plants and animals.
So when farmers give that argument that they're actually creating a land that is productive versus a land that was never productive, what is your reaction?
Well, that's the cultural story of the Mackenzie, that these are toughened, wizened old Southern men who have created something out of nothing.
So guys, we talked about props. This one here is the only thing that I have that originated in the movie.
People like Dawn have a real stake in this land and are worried that increased dairy farming could ruin its Gondor good looks.
People come to see exactly what they saw in the movie. And so therefore, if the grass was green and, you know, we had cows everywhere, we didn't see that in Lord of the Rings, did we?
So that would essentially put you out of business?
Pretty much, yeah. If I had to give it milk, I could do that if I could stay in the Mackenzie. Yeah. So what we're gonna do, you're gonna get those flags and those swords in your hand, and you are going to yell, "For Rohan!" For Rohan! Perfect.